Imagine leaving your home behind, with your family. Everything you own is loaded into a wagon. Ahead of you is a new life, a new land, a new beginning. You are told that California is waiting. All you have to do is get there. But somewhere along the journey, you make one decision that changes everything. The road becomes longer. Your food begins to disappear. Your animals die. Winter gets closer. And then, high in the mountains, the snow begins to fall. At first, you believe it will pass, but it doesn't. The snow keeps coming. Soon, you are trapped. And over the next few months, the people around you begin to die. This is the true story of the Donner Party, one of the most tragic survival stories in American history. It was the spring of 1846. America was expanding westward, and thousands of people dreamed of reaching California. For many families, the journey represented opportunity, land, freedom, and the chance to begin again. Among those heading west were the Donner and Reed families. George Donner was an older, successful farmer from Illinois. His brother Jacob joined the journey, along with several other families. Together, the Donner-Reed Party began a journey of roughly 2,500 miles. There were men, women, children, and wagons carrying their homes and supplies. They left Illinois in April 1846 and continued west. But there was one major problem. They were already leaving relatively late in the season. To reach California safely, wagon trains needed to cross the Sierra Nevada before the heavy winter snow arrived. Every day mattered. Every delay mattered. And soon, the group would make a decision that would cost them precious time. As the travelers moved west, they heard about a new route. It was called the Hastings Cutoff. The route was promoted as a shortcut to California. It promised to save hundreds of miles. For a tired wagon train, this sounded like an incredible opportunity. Why continue along the longer established trail when a faster route was available? But there was a problem. The shortcut was not the easy road they had imagined. The Donner-Reed Party entered the new route and quickly discovered difficult terrain. They had to cut their way through mountains and wilderness. Wagons became damaged. Animals became exhausted. Progress slowed to a crawl. Days turned into weeks. And those lost weeks would become critical. The group was not moving toward California quickly. They were falling behind. Then came another terrible obstacle. The Great Salt Lake Desert. The crossing was brutal. There was little water. The heat was intense. Animals died. Supplies were lost. And when the survivors finally emerged, they were exhausted. The shortcut had not saved them. It had cost them time. Time they could never get back. By the time the Donner-Reed Party reached the Sierra Nevada, winter was approaching, and they were dangerously late. In late October 1846, the group reached the mountains near what is now Donner Lake in California. They were close. California was on the other side of the mountains. Freedom was within reach. But then the weather changed. Snow began to fall. The travelers attempted to continue, but the wagons could not move through the deepening snow. The route ahead disappeared beneath white drifts. The mountains became a prison. The Donner-Reed Party was trapped. Some families found shelter in crude cabins near the lake. Others stayed at a separate camp at Alder Creek. They believed they might have to wait only a short time. Perhaps the weather would improve. Perhaps the snow would melt. But instead, winter became worse. More snow fell. The temperature dropped. And the people trapped in the mountains began to understand a terrifying truth. Their food would not last. At first, They ate the food they had brought with them. Then they slaughtered their remaining animals. Oxen, cattle, anything that could provide food. But eventually, even the animals were gone. By December, desperation had taken over. The survivors began eating rawhide. Leather that had once been used for equipment became food. Families were weak. Children were starving. Disease and exposure made everything worse. And then, people began to die. Imagine being trapped inside a small shelter. Snow piled outside. No rescue in sight. Your children are hungry. The food is gone. And every morning, you wake up wondering who will survive another day. For the Donner Party, this was no longer simply a difficult journey. It had become a fight against death. And the worst part was that they had no idea when help would arrive, or if anyone was coming at all. Some members of the group realized that waiting for rescue might mean death. A small group decided to attempt something almost impossible. They would leave the camps. They would walk through the snow-covered Sierra Nevada, and they would try to reach help. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. The name revealed exactly how desperate the situation had become. They carried limited supplies. They made crude snowshoes, and they began walking into the frozen wilderness. Among them were men and women. But the journey quickly became a nightmare. They were weak before they even started. The snow was deep. Food disappeared. People began to collapse. One by one, members of the group died. Eventually, the survivors were forced to make unimaginable decisions in order to stay alive. Some consumed the bodies of those who had died. It is one of the darkest parts of the Donner Party story. But it is also a reminder of how far human beings can be pushed when survival is the only thing left. Eventually, a few members of the Forlorn Hope reached civilization. And finally, the people in California learned the truth. Families were trapped in the mountains. They were starving. And if help did not arrive soon, everyone would die. The first rescue party began its journey into the mountains in February 1847. The rescuers carried food, but reaching the stranded camps was incredibly difficult. They had to travel through deep snow. The mountains were still dangerous. And when they finally arrived, what they found shocked them. The survivors were starving. Many were too weak to walk. Children had become so thin that rescuers had to carry some of them. But there was another terrible problem. The rescuers could not take everyone at once. They simply did not have enough food. So they took some survivors and began the dangerous journey back. Others had to remain behind. Imagine watching rescuers arrive after months of suffering, only to learn that there was not enough help for everyone. Several rescue missions would eventually reach the camps, but by then, many had already died. George Donner never made it out. He had suffered an injury earlier in the journey, and his condition worsened during the winter. His wife, Tamsin Donner, remained with him. Neither survived. Their children, however, were rescued. One of them was a young girl named Eliza. She was only 3 years old when the journey began. She survived the mountains, but she would never see her parents again. Years later, Eliza wrote about the experience. The tragedy had followed her family name for the rest of her life. Of the 87 people who began the journey with the Donner Reed Party, 40 died. 40 lives lost during a journey that began with hope. But the story of the Donner Party is more complicated than a simple tale about taking the wrong shortcut. Yes, the Hastings Cutoff caused devastating delays. Yes, the travelers lost valuable time. But the disaster was created by a chain of problems: late departure, difficult terrain, broken wagons, lost animals, exhausted supplies, and finally, an early and brutal winter, one disaster after another, until there was no easy way out. Today, the Donner Party is remembered because of the horror of what happened during that winter. But behind the famous name were real human beings, parents trying to save their children, children losing their families, people making decisions under conditions most of us can barely imagine. Some survived, some didn't, and those who survived carried the memory of that winter for the rest of their lives. The Donner Party left home looking for a better future. They believed the road west would lead them to California. They could not know that their journey would become one of the most famous survival stories in American history. The snow trapped them. Hunger destroyed them. And the mountains tested them beyond anything they had ever imagined. Yet even in the middle of that nightmare, people continued to fight. They walked through impossible conditions. They protected their children. They searched for help. They survived. The Donner Party reminds us that history is not only made by kings, presidents, and armies. Sometimes history is made by ordinary people, standing in the snow, with nothing left, trying to survive one more day. And sometimes the difference between reaching your destination and never reaching it at all is a single decision made somewhere along the road. This was the true story of the Donner Party, a journey toward a dream that became a fight for survival.